sound kind of low or weird, or if I have to leave to cough or take a sip of water. I currently have strep throat, and it kind of hurts to speak for long periods of time, but I'm still going to try my best and give a good presentation nonetheless. According to William Vieder, the author of our literary analysis, Who is Jane? The Intricate Feminism of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper is one of the great American stories of the 19th century and one of the premier women texts. Written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who was born July 3, 1860, the story tells of a woman who is driven to madness because of isolation in a room with a disturbing wallpaper. Gilman was a leading woman on women's issues of her time, and she contributed greatly to the literary world. Vieder's analysis breaks down into 4 parts: projections, the vexations of maternity, predacious males, and irresolution, and he answers the main question brought out at the end of the Yellow Wallpaper when the heroine screams, "I've got out at last, in spite of you and Jane. Who is Jane?" To begin, I'll discuss section 1, projection. In this section, Vieder first brings out that Gilman herself had family issues. She would resort to something called projective identification, in which she would replace the parent with items, or in her case, dolls. She gave this characteristic to her heroine in the Yellow Wallpaper, who as a kid would be entertained in blank walls and plain furniture, and as an adult in the house would project onto the bureau and the chair. In a way, this is a coping mechanism instead of a retreat from hostile life, which we may be put under the impression of because of how the husband treats the heroine in the story. In this section, Vieder mentions experts on the subject, such as Siegel, who's seen firsthand, especially in his account that he tells about the 4-year-old, that this projectiveness isn't uncommon. We're also told in this section that the projection of the parents in turn makes our main character see herself as an infant. For example, Mary, the nurse, takes care of the son. Jenny, the sister-in-law, cleans the house, and our main character does nothing, like a baby. And also we're told that this projection isn't always positive. For example, our main character has an oral attack on the wallpaper, which could be considered the mom, and there's violence that's done on the room and the husband, which could be considered the dad. Vieder also randomly throws in that a novel called Jane Eyre inspires Gilman when writing The Yellow Wallpaper, especially a character named Miss Reed, who also associates with an object, her wardrobe equaling our heroine's wallpaper, and then the color red equaling our heroine's yellow. And so maybe this is kind of a nod to the Jane in this sense. Overall, I think Vieder did brilliant in this section of the critical analysis. How he comes up with these examples of projection, I'll never know because I could never do that. For example, he makes the point that the heroine projects onto the house and the garden as secure settings because that's what she craves, and also the bureau and the chair to be seen as parents. And another thing that I would never think of is the wallpaper resembling a diaper. I knew the heroine described it in an extensive and weird way, but I would never make the connection that Vieder does. Basically, this section just betters my understanding of the symbolism in the story, and things that I wouldn't have thought of on my own, I was only able to realize because of Vieder. The next section is called The Vexations of Maternity, and Vieder introduces us to something called regressive projection, and this is where the heroine projects as a child. And this still plays into the last section of projection, but it shows that part of it is because of her birthing situation, not solely the childhood trauma that she has. She doesn't want to be a mother, she wants to return to mother, or that infant state. This problem wouldn't be an issue with people who have a good relationship with their mother, but we know that this isn't the case for Gilman, who herself acted like a child after she gave birth because of her trauma, and it's not the case for her heroine either, because she projects herself onto the heroine. They mimic each other. Vieder also mentions how the heroine wants to be a baby, not have the baby, so that makes her dislike her own and kind of view it as a rival. This is made very clear in the third paragraph of this section, which I especially liked, where the heroine said that she could stand the room more than she could stand her baby, which we know is a problem because she hated the room. And then, of course, at the end, Veeder circles back around to that childhood trauma, just to really hone in on the point that that really is the leading cause of this issue. This section of Veeder's analysis really helped me understand the significance, which I didn't initially know there was one, of the nursery. It's never explicitly said what this room used to be, and so our heroine claiming that it used to be a nursery helps us to understand her projection as an infant. And it's also brought out that the nurse in the yellow wallpaper and Gilman's mother in real life share the same name, Mary. So in a sense, maybe this was Gilman giving her mom a second chance to be a good parent or to raise a child. On my own, I would have never got this because I would never study Gilman enough to realize that point. The next section is entitled Predaceous Males, and Veeder breaks this into two parts, which makes a lot of sense because it is very long. In the first part, he starts off talking again about projections, of course, but this time focusing on men instances. He starts about how the heroine talks about the boys' room, which could equal men being predators, and then he brings out the point that John is kind of the start of these projections because he's the one who got our heroine pregnant. Then he starts to talk more and more about men and family, and he finally gets to the point of our heroine's obsession with her brother. And Veeder poses two ideas as to why maybe she's so obsessed with him. The first one being he's like a father to her. Her father's likely dead, or maybe just absent, so that brother kind of fills the space. And two, maybe she's jealous of the brother and sister relationship that John and Jenny have. The next part of this section, we learn more about her relationship with John. They rarely have sex, even though it's the duty of sexuality is an important one. He likely cheats on our heroine because of that matter, and he finds other women, such as Mary and Jenny, to do the other wifely duties. And he really thinks that he's good to his wife and only letting mother and children visit her, when really it's just manipulative. And then finally, at the very end of the section, Veeder re-mentions that question, who is Jane, which is good because I was kind of starting to get worried about if he had forgotten about it or not. But on this section of the Predaceous Males, overall, I disagreed a lot. I felt like his points about the brother especially were a stretch. The heroine's dad being dead or absent and the brother filling that gap, yes, total sense. The brother and the husband being basically the same, pointing to an incestual desire, not at all. That's crazy to me. And then the second part of the section, I just straight up didn't understand. It felt all over the place, not organized, and then the points that Veeder brought out, especially the one about the heroine wanting to make her husband seem more feminine at the end, it just didn't make sense to me. I feel like Veeder was reaching for more and more points and ones that didn't even make sense at that. And I will admit that I'm not someone who's going to understand things the first time around, but I can read it again and understand later. But for this section, there was just no hope. And then in the final section of Veeder's analysis, we finally get answers to the burning question, who is Jane? And it's none other than our heroine. We learn a lot about Jane in this section. For one, she has identity issues, big time. She sees herself not only as Jenny, but also as the woman in the wallpaper, and she doesn't see herself as an individual when she's with John. She also, as we learned once again, is very similar to Gilman, as both of them were very desperate to escape the situations they were in. Finally, this is the good part, so pay attention. Veeder tells us that Jane isn't special. There were women before in the house who were crazy and would try to jump out of the windows and gnaw on the bed like Jane did. And then we're also told that Jane is the epitome of what culture has said about women. So we think this whole time she's insane, she's crazy, she's mad. But Veeder brings out that she's just a normal woman. Historically, of course, she's not normal. In this section, it was really my favorite for understanding new points, and it was really a lot of eureka moments for me. I think it was very interesting the point Veeder brought out, which would be good to keep in mind when rereading, that yes, Jane regresses to childhood, but she also literally regresses historically with how she acts and how that mimics women in the past. I also found a favorite new understanding throughout the whole analysis that Jane did this to herself. Veeder brings out that she tied herself up, saying it's my rope. And so it kind of makes you second guess all this talk about the parents being the issue, the childhood trauma, or even her husband John, because Veeder is clear that this is Jane's doing. And after reading this, meditating on it, annotating it, studying it, I really grew to appreciate and understand the yellow wallpaper in a much deeper sense. And I'm not going to lie and pretend that these were just small revelations that I was able to understand because of Veeder, because they aren't. The things that he pieced together, I could never come to my own understanding, and no matter how hard I try to understand it. So I think that after spending 4 days straight, really digging into Veeder and his analysis of the yellow wallpaper, it's time for me to do another read-through from a new point of view on this story. Thank you.